Welcome to the Table in a Large Room podcast. I hope you'll pull up a chair and join me in sharing what Charlotte Mason termed the Feast of Ideas. I'm your host, Ann Butler, and our topic today is Hymns, Part 1. I'm going to share this message in two parts, focusing primarily in this first part on the biblical encouragement for singing hymns. On my blog a few years ago, I shared the story of my dear friend's son who was captured on video singing a hymn. It was especially meaningful because we could see that this young man was singing the song over his dear grandfather who was seriously ill and lying in a hospital bed. But even more wonderful was that the grandfather then rallied and joined in the song, "It Is Well With My Soul." Part of what made that moment so precious and notable was simply that this grandson even knew both the words and the tune of the old hymn well enough to suddenly and effortlessly think to sing it over his grandfather. You know, sharing a common known collection of hymns bridging generations was once commonplace within the church, but it's really now become almost an anomaly. That touching moment that I described was possible because my friend's family and church had developed the habit of incorporating those hymns into their worship, both at home and in corporate services, week by week, month by month, year by year, as he grew. And I just think it's wonderful that he had that hymn at the ready for this really spontaneous moment of blessing his grandfather. Like my friend, our family has developed the simple practice of learning the hymns. Long ago, I just purchased some used and reasonably priced hymnals, and I collected a list of hymns and that I thought we'd like to learn, and we just simply started choosing one every month or two to learn. So of course we sing other songs, but often we sing a hymn at the close of a family Bible study or prayer time. There are just plenty of online resources for picking up this practice. One popular one is Happy Hymnody. But as a Christian educator and using the Charlotte Mason method of teaching it, hymns have really been a part of our family's monthly rhythms for a number of years. But if you're a younger parent or educator, perhaps less convinced over the purpose or value of hymns, or maybe you just think of them as old, outdated songs, I'd just like to take this episode and the next to share a few words in the hopes that I might win you over to see their value. My husband and I have a passion for encouraging families to not compartmentalize their spiritual lives for Sunday morning church, but to infuse their ordinary days and their family culture with worship. And one simple practice that we like to include is that of singing hymns. So in this two-part series, I'm going to begin first in part by sharing some biblical precedents, sharing some of what the Bible actually says about hymns and worship. And then in the second part, I want to share a brief, maybe a more thorough explanation of what even is a hymn, along with some unique advantages of hymns that I think they offer to our life of faith. I love that Christians are uniquely known as a singing people. The Bible actually contains over 400 references to singing, with over 50 direct commands to sing. In fact, the longest book of the Bible, Psalms, originally was a book of songs. So God's Word really has a lot to say about this topic of singing. So I'm going to share a few brief observations from His Word. As Romans 11:33 to 12:1 says, our whole body, mind, and soul belongs to God, not just our voices and musical choices. So worship includes all aspects of our lives, from what we eat to our thoughts and our desires and our greatest hopes and dreams and our outward actions. Romans 12:1 says this, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." So here we see that worship is a whole life, body, and mind and affections experience of sacrifice in recognition of God's mercy. And this includes songs of praise. But really our goal is to experience a whole life of surrender to Him. So I'm not saying that singing hymns is the ultimate in worship, but I'm just saying that simply singing hymns is one expression of worship. Secondly, Jesus says in John 4:23 to 24, "But the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth." So we see from that passage that we're to worship God in spirit and truth, and that God is actually seeking those who will worship him in this way. And I take that to mean our worship must be God-focused. It must be genuine and truth-filled, so both inwardly genuine and outwardly truthful in what we're actually speaking and singing. And also to be led by the Spirit. So with that, I'm just going to cover also over the handful of biblical passages that actually specifically mention hymns. The first is from the two Gospels, Matthew 23:30 and Mark 14:26, which are stated almost identically, saying this, "And when they sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives." So we see here that singing a hymn together is what Jesus turned to with his disciples during the Last Supper, just before he and they faced his betrayal at the Mount of Olives and his execution on the cross. So the second passage comes in Acts 16:25, where it says, "About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing. They were singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them." So here, Paul and Silas were encouraging their own hearts with hymns as they faced the trial of being in prison for their faith, and their singing was also in itself a voice of witness to the other onlooking prisoners. Then in the epistles in Ephesians 5:18-19, we're instructed to sing hymns. So this is what it says, "And do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart." So here, along with psalms and spiritual songs, Paul instructs the believers to sing heartfelt hymns. And then finally in Colossians 3:16, Paul says again, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God." So here again, along with the word and songs and psalms and spiritual songs, we are to sing hymns as a form of teaching, form of praise. We're told to do this also with thanksgiving and with one another. We aim for all of our lives to worship God and to do this in spirit and truth. We see that Jesus turned to singing a hymn and offered this to his disciples before heading to the cross. Paul and Silas sang hymns while in prison for their faith, and we are repeatedly instructed to include hymns in our own lives, along with God's word and psalms and spiritual songs. So hopefully you see there is some biblical precedent for incorporating hymns into our personal and our family or corporate worship. But perhaps you're still wondering, what even is a hymn? So if you want a more thorough answer to that question, I hope you'll come back to hear part 2 of this series, where I just share a little bit more explanation and further about the unique benefits of including hymns in your life. So thanks for listening, and remember, if you found this to be helpful, I hope you'll like and subscribe and share it with your friends. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks.